When you submit your manuscript to a publisher, they're probably not going to read it to the end.
What? You mean those super busy people who get millions of submissions don't read all the way to the end? I'm shocked.
I'm not sure they get millions.
Lots. They got lots of submissions.
Yeah, most people think a good story is enough. But the truth is, if the prose lacks professional standards, an editor will lose confidence in your ability to hold a reader's attention for 80,000 words. As an experienced editor reading submissions for a publishing company, I can often tell if a manuscript is worth publishing before I even finish the first sentence.
The first sentence? That's a bit harsh, isn't it? Don't you give them like a few sentences or a chapter to warm up at least?
Well, yeah.
That's rough.
I do read the first paragraph at least. But it depends on how engaging the writing is as to how far I'll go. Publishers don't have the time to read a book that shows clearly in the first page that it's not ready for publication.
Okay, so you give it a whole page. I guess that's nice.
The thing is that authors probably don't know the criteria publishers use to evaluate a book. And if they did know, they'd be able to rely on more than just gut feelings to polish their book.
So today, we're going to reveal that rigorous criteria that publishers use to evaluate a book.
And of course, it's the same criteria we use when we're doing a pre-submission manuscript appraisal, where we help authors to transform their raw ideas into professional manuscripts.
Hi, I'm Rose, the book designer at Alkira Publishing.
And I'm Talia, the managing editor at Alkira Publishing. We help authors publish books they can be proud of.
Many authors tend to rely on their gut feeling to polish their books. And that's a great guide for sure. Your book has to make you feel happy. But you're saying that that's not enough?
Yeah, exactly. So gut feeling is for the first draft. Applying knowledge of craft is for the second draft. Applying feedback from beta readers or professional manuscript appraisals is the third draft. And looking at your manuscript in terms of the criteria publishers use to evaluate your book is a good idea for the final polish.
So what if you're self-publishing or using a self-publishing provider that doesn't have a selection process? Isn't the publisher's criteria kind of irrelevant in that case?
No, it's still relevant because publishers read submissions the way readers read books. The difference is that the publishing house's editorial team knows the criteria and can analyse whether a book meets them or not, whereas readers just naturally respond to whether or not that criteria is achieved. They don't know what the criteria is, right? But the criteria is based on what keeps readers reading.
So if you want readers to read to the end of the book, then you probably need to make sure that you're following this criteria.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll have readers pick it up and put it down and go, I didn't finish it, whatever, and then never come back to your writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which you don't want.
Yeah, I learned this the hard way when I submitted my debut book 16 years ago now. I didn't consider the fact that publishers deal with a constant flow of submissions. It didn't occur to me that they'd stop reading the moment their attention drops. Had I known that they might not even finish the first paragraph if the skills weren't there, I would have looked at my work completely differently. I mean, that book did get read by an agent and she agreed to represent me, but it didn't impress any of the big publishers enough for them to offer me a publishing deal. One editor liked it enough to tell me that, but their marketing department wasn't prepared to take it on. After that, I looked at the book differently. More through the eyes of a publisher, and then I revised it one more time and self-published. Now I know exactly how a publisher's editorial team evaluates what they read.
And that's because of your experience as a publisher now. That's 16 years in between as you becoming a publisher.
Yeah.
And now we're sharing this secret map so our poor viewers and authors don't have to guess.
Precisely. Readers deserve quality books, and I want authors to be prepared before they hit submit.
Right, so let's get into it. Draw back the curtain for us. What are publishers looking for?
In general, well, it's slightly different for different publishers in that sometimes they're looking for a particular genre at a particular time. But I expect that their general criteria would be similar to ours at Alkira Publishing. We look for books where the plot is well structured, well paced, conceptually sound and engaging, where the characters are well developed and their dialogue and interactions with others are believable. The book needs to not be overwritten or unnecessarily wordy. For instance, no obvious dumps of information, no unnecessary repetition, and no irrelevant scenes. Changes in point of view should be clear without head hopping. The prose needs to be well written, engaging, and active rather than passive. The book must not have socially irresponsible themes or gratuitous graphic violence, and it should use language consciously.
What does using language consciously mean?
It means being aware of when language might be offensive, biased, or stereotyping a group of people. And you need to make sure that you use it like that kind of language only where it's necessary for a specific character rather than having the whole tone of the book offensive.
Is that just an Alkira publishing thing? I mean, I know you're very strong on that.
No, I don't doubt that some publishers don't care, and self-publishers might have no awareness of such content in their work at all. But there's a strong push in professional editing circles for editors to evaluate what they're working on through a conscious language frame and to flag any issues for the author.
Evaluating those criteria would mean they'd have to read the whole book though, right?
If I'm doing a manuscript appraisal where the author is paying for my time, then of course I read it all through and I give feedback on all those points. But if someone sent me a finished manuscript as a submission for a publication, I stop reading as soon as it's clear that any one of those criteria hasn't been met. Yeah. If the story's got potential, I will offer the author a manuscript appraisal so I can then help them refine the work until it does meet the criteria for publication. But not every publisher does that, particularly mainstream ones. Usually they just give a yes or a no, but since we're author funded, we do give authors that opportunity.
And what if they don't take that opportunity to work with you to refine the book or can't afford it?
Well, then we have our self-publishing arm, Escarpment Publishing. In self-publishing, the author decides if their book is ready for publication. But Alkira is a selective publisher where the editorial staff make that decision.
So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how you actually evaluate a submission with all those general criteria in mind. I mean, they all sound like common sense to me, but as an author, how does an author know? What's the secret sauce you want the authors to know?
I think the main point here is that an author can never read their own work the way a publisher or a reader does. Yeah. That's because the author knows the work inside and out, in its entirety.
And you're like so close to it. You can't see it.
Yeah, you just know. You know all the backstory, you know all of it, right? Whereas publishers, editors and readers know nothing about the book. So you have to convince them early on that the book is worth reading. And then you have to make sure that you have all the necessary elements to keep them reading.
Gotta hook them. Gotta hook them and keep them. But that's why books always need editors, right? Because you, as an author, you can't read your book with an outside perspective like a reader can.
Exactly. However, you can, with a bit of mental gymnastics, approximate it.
Really? How?
Well, authors have a good imagination, right? So you imagine that you know nothing about the book. Yeah? You imagine you are a reader, and then you read it through those eyes. Now, it is only an approximation, and you do need to do it after not working on it for a month or so. And it's usually good to have read a few other top books in your genre in that meantime. But approaching your book in that way, even if you don't do a particularly good job of it, can be very illuminating.
And I guess, fresh eyes, just not thinking about it or reading it for a good chunk of time and not enough to forget it.
Yeah.
And then coming back and looking at it with that manuscript assessment criteria in mind.
Well, with a reader's perspective in mind.
Yeah.
Like, I know nothing about this book. I've never seen it before. I don't know where it's going.
Yeah. So what are these criteria, like, in the order you apply them as you read? Because you listed a lot of things before, like you said you don't read past the first paragraph. You can't tell all of that in the first paragraph. So
I didn't say I don't read past the first. I
sometimes.
Said sometimes I don't, right? Okay, well, the first paragraph, right, must hook the reader. Like, that's the important thing. If it doesn't, then really why should we read it on? No.
Yeah, and we do have a whole video on writing good first paragraphs, and Talia also covers it in her book, this one, Novel Writing Mastery.
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on it in there.
There's a whole chapter on how to write a first paragraph. So it is very important to get your first paragraph right.
Yeah. So
What after that?
What after that? Well, the prose, right, should indicate that the author has a good grasp of written language and writing craft, so they express themselves clearly. If the prose is poor, then I personally just cannot keep reading, because it doesn't matter how good the story is, I still can't publish it until the prose is of a professional standard, right? So I always look for prose that's active and engaging. So if the writing is wordy or full of information dumps, it's not a professional standard. And authors need to watch out for like little technical slips. So the biggest red flag I ever saw was a book starting with a present participle. It signalled a real lack of craft education immediately.
And Talia's book, The Elements of Active Prose, gives you lots of tips for self-editing to refine your prose. So if you are like me and don't know what a present participle means, you probably need to read this book.
Yeah, or what's wrong with having it at the beginning of a sentence.
Or what's wrong with putting it at the beginning of a sentence.
The answer's in here.
The answer's in this book.
It's also
I need to read this because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Oh no, we talked about it in one of our other videos.
Yes, there's a video on it somewhere.
Yeah, there's 6+1 ways to improve your prose or something. So after the first paragraph, it's important that the main character should be introduced first and alone. And the secondary characters added in gradually after the reader has had time to get to know the main character. Yeah, no, I know. But
I've definitely read books that don't do that. What about a prologue? I mean, prologues
Prologue's a bad idea.
So often don't start with the main character. Prologues start with that's a
different.
Mysterious figure,
That's
or
fine.
like the bad guy, or like the
We're not talking about a prologue.
Okay, so prologues. Prologue is the first paragraph. These are guidelines, guys.
Yeah, and prologues are generally avoid them, right? If you're going to have a prologue, 2 paragraphs.
Every fantasy book has prologues.
No, not every fantasy book does have.
It's a big part of the fantasy
when I
genre.
wrote my series, right, initially I had 2 pages of prologue. Now, when I finally published it, there's none. There's no prologue, because it doesn't need a prologue.
Yeah, but you're not Brandon Sanderson.
Prologues are they're a whole different
kettle
thing,
of fish.
Right? I'm not talking about a prologue. I'm talking about the first sentence of chapter 1. Okay. The introducing of characters, yes, that is something that a lot of authors will bundle them in, but you have to remember that a publisher's reading fast. They're reading fast. They don't have time to read slow. Also, they are very fast readers. That's why they are in that position. The most avid readers do read fast. And if you introduce too many characters, all together, they won't, it's like it's too much.
Yeah. Right? I've definitely had that when there's too many characters all bunny. Like, I don't know who's who or who the main character is supposed to be.
Yeah, and you don't know anything about it.
You get lost.
You get lost. You need to grasp it. And I'm not saying that, it needs to be pages later. But just give 1 paragraph at least to the first character, right? But do it in order. Like I had a submission the other day, and it went straight into a conversation between 3 people with no idea where they were, what the time frame was, the age of the people. I mean, I sort of got the age from the conversation, but three people having this, and it was a phone conversation, so there's no cues about these people at all, right? So that's what you want to avoid. It does have to be a little bit logical, at the same time without being prescriptive. And from the moment a character appears, I'll be evaluating whether they're complex or one-dimensional, whether the dialogue is natural, and whether the characters have their own voices.
Any quick tips on characters and dialogue while we're on that?
Sure. Well, if you strip away the he said, she said, would your characters still sound distinct? Right? If everyone sounds the same, the reader loses interest.
The way they talk needs to be distinctive. The words they use. Yeah.
And the setting should be introduced briefly early on, so we know the time, the place, and the culture in which the story takes place, right? And this should be done without information dumps and without showing rather than telling, of course. So how the setting is done is important as making sure that it's there. Like I said before about the phone conversation. So it doesn't have to be a whole big thing. It can be done in a sentence or 2 sentences, but needs to be there. The next thing I'll be looking for is whether the point of view is clear And of course, as soon as there's any head hopping, it's like a note. You know, sometimes the head hopping's small and it's not a problem, but there'll be a note. I'll make a note, you know. And if it's really bad, then, you know, like if it's all over the place, and it's just like, yeah, okay, put that one aside. But the thing is, I'll be checking for that as I go through. What?
I feel like we've done another video where we talked a lot about head hopping and when it's...
Yeah, point of view.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes that is part of the book, is to head hop.
No, you've got a misunderstanding of head hopping.
Okay, so sometimes it's part of the book to tell the story from multiple characters' points of view.
Yeah, that is not head hopping.
So what is head hopping?
Head hopping specifically is when you don't flag a change between points of view. So say you're writing...
So when it's unclear who you've jumped into.
How do I explain this simply? Okay, so if you're writing from my point of view, right, through my eyes, and then suddenly there's a sentence saying what you're thinking, and then you go back to what I'm thinking through my eyes, that's head hopping.
Right.
Right, it's because if I want to change from my perspective to your perspective, right, I need to flag that change.
There needs to be a scene break or a chapter break.
A scene break, a chapter break, or something that where you say you pass the baton. So, for instance, if I'm the point of view character and I walk out of the room, then we can naturally go to your point of view. There are sort of tools.
But you need to clearly signify that you've jumped into that person.
So
George left the room. Mary thought about this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not wondering who on earth
you're talking about.
Who on earth's head you're in now.
So you can switch points of view with characters. It just needs to be clear and not like
and
a
not
sentence
all over
at a
the
time.
place. That's right. I mean, the worst is, and you do see this, you know, people, they're writing an omniscient point of view and they think that means you can just jump around.
Yeah.
So you'll get one sentence, so-and-so's thinking this, next sentence someone's, and then the next sentence someone else, and it's just like you're going, please tell the story from one point of view, right? And even an omniscient point of view, there is one point of view, and that's the omniscient point of view. And sure, he knows what's in everyone's head, but just please do not tell us. It's also a very unskillful way to describe a scene.
That makes sense. It's good to clarify that when you say head hopping.
Yeah, well, I have seen someone refer to a chapter in one person's point of view and a chapter in another person's point of view as head hopping, and that is not. No. So if all of that's in place without any glaring red flags, I'll usually read to around the 25% mark, because by this point we should have had an inciting incident to get the plot rolling, right? And we should basically know what the story is about. We should know the protagonist's aims, what or who the antagonist is, and have some idea of the kinds of challenges the protagonist might face.
It's a lot to get into place in the first 25% of a book.
Well, no, it's not a lot to get in place. It's like, by that point, the reader should be settling into the story, right? Not wondering what it's all about and where it might be going. Right? So 25% is like the latest point at which something has to happen.
Yeah, and it is sort of the point where a reader, even if you're not thinking specifically about these categories, like you get to that point and just naturally go, I'm not really engaged in this book, I'm going to not finish it.
Yeah. It's like, well, where is this book going?
Yeah.
It's like, what's the story about?
Yeah. And if you get past that point, what are you looking for as you read on?
Okay, well, a strong structure primarily, right, where the dramatic tension doesn't flag. You want the challenges to keep rising for the protagonist. You want them to have some wins and some losses. I want to see both an outer and an inner character arc. I want to see the character develop in response to the action. And of course, the world building should be clear and consistent. Any themes should be developed as the story goes along. And I mean, so on, right? Basically, all the other things you'd expect in a well-written book.
I think we've made a video on each of those points you just mentioned. If you want a more in-depth guide, there's also a chapter on each of them. This one?
No, the other one. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah,
you should get both of these.
Yeah. This one's about the overall novel writing, and this one's about the prose, how to get your prose top-notch.
Right. Yeah. So can you give our viewers any other tips for making sure their submission gets read to the end? Okay, well, avoid the too easy trap, right? I once read a story where everything went right for the protagonist. It was idyllic, but dull. I had to tell the author to add obstacles like social status or religious differences to create actual tension.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can things be too hard as well? Like if it just feels hopeless?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a character.
I've read
if a character,
books like that
yeah,
that have been published.
yeah, sure. I mean, self-publishers can publish whatever they want.
Yes.
Right. I mean, if a character doesn't have any wins at all, it's just frustrating.
For the reader.
For the reader.
And depressing, honestly.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, it's also fine. I mean, sure, have it all be really negative if you want, you know. It's just, I will tell you.
You might
It's
lose
just
some readers.
I personally will probably stop reading and go, "Ugh, it's too miserable."
Yeah.
And as an editor, I'll just say to you, give them some wins.
Yeah.
You know, just lighten it up a bit, you know.
And what else?
Well, every scene must have at least 2 reasons for existing, right? Like moving the plot forward and developing a character. If it doesn't have 2, it's an obsolete scene and should be cut. And the main one is that it should move the plot forward. If a scene doesn't move the plot forward, cut it. It shouldn't be there.
Yeah. I hate books where the story just kind of wanders off and you wonder where it's going or if this is even relevant.
Yeah.
Just be like, oh, well, the author just liked this scene, so they left
yeah,
it in,
yeah,
but it doesn't really serve
yeah.
any overarching purpose.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, don't overdo first person present tense thoughts in a third person past tense story.
What?
You know, the thoughts that they put in italic. Yeah, I mean, that's,
you don't want to have like massive.
you don't want to have
chunks of text.
half pages
Yeah.
that are in italics where normally the book's being told in the past tense, like you know, George hurried along the da-da-da.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got this first
person present tense thinking.
Yes, it's being told in third person, so it's he, she, and the names of the characters.
Yep.
And suddenly you've got, and it's past tense, the story has already happened. And then the first person thoughts are I, me, mine, and present tense, like it's happening now.
Yes.
So if you have anything more than the occasional or even rare single sentence, it's a massive intrusion.
Yeah, like I have seen books where it's also like visually, because it has to be in italics, like from a design and formatting perspective, it visually breaks up the flow and it's like it becomes very hard to read, because if it's just someone's internal thoughts, it just is formatted the same as the rest of the book. But it's like you've then got this massive chunk of italics.
Yeah.
And then by the time, like, because it's always happening in a split second because it's someone's internal thoughts, it's like they're in the middle of an external conversation, and by the time you've read all those internal thoughts, you've forgotten what's happening up there in the outside world. And it's like, it's a big break.
That's right. And it's a complete change of tense and
pace.
Tense and point of view.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, I rejected one manuscript that had really long passages of thoughts because those thoughts could have been handled through an intimate third person point of view. Like, there was absolutely no reason for them to be there. It could all have been expressed in that intimate third person point of view without jarring the reader.
We've got a whole video on point of view. If you want to know what an intimate third person point of view is, go to that video.
Yeah. I mean, luckily that was easily fixed, right? And the rest of the book was great. So we did publish it. Yeah.
So I can imagine some authors thinking that these criteria might stifle their creativity and that they should just write however and whatever they want. What would you say to people who think that?
Well, that is what you do in your first draft.
Yeah.
Right?
That's when you throw it all down.
You just write it, you just get it down. These kinds of criteria for the self-editing stage where you refine your work. And if you want your book to pass a submission process of a selective publisher, genuine selective publisher.
And that means a traditional publisher, one of the big ones.
Or a genuinely selective one like us, then you need to pay attention because it's just the way the business is, right? And it can be really hard. Like, one publisher I did a workshop with said that if an author used any dialogue tag other than said, she rejected the book. Just like that. Yeah, I know. She also rejected anything that overused adverbs. Now, she was an editor at Random House, so there you go. I'm not like that, but I will tell you what you need to do to fix it. The big publishers just send you a rejection notice and no explanation. So, you know, ignore all these guidelines
At your own peril.
Points of craft, just fine. And if you're self-editing, just publish your first draft. Just don't expect anyone to want to read to the end.
Yeah.
Honest conversations. These are honest conversations.
And I'm not an editor or selective publisher, but I am a reader, and all the things that you mentioned are things that I want in my books, and they are things that if they're not done well, I will just stop reading.
Yeah.
So they are based on what readers actually want, not some random list made up by hoity-toity academics.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, the publishers are trying to publish books that readers want to read. So these criteria aren't about stifling your creativity. They're about, respect for the reader's time and getting the craft of storytelling really good.
Yeah, to maintain the beauty of the English language.
Of a well-crafted book.
Exactly. I mean, the written language is so beautiful. I don't like to see it diminish.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, remember that it's okay to have a very, very messy first draft, right? Even the pros do. In fact, that's the way most first drafts are. The idea of a first draft is just to write, just get the story down without care for any point of craft. The goal of writing isn't to be perfect immediately and not to follow all the guidelines as you write. That's by the by, right? The point is to be willing to use these tools at the editing stage to draw the masterpiece out of that first draft.
If you want to see this list of criteria we've mentioned written down, there's a novel revision checklist in the description, and the further details are in these books, which we've been waving around.
There's also an associated blog post on our website, which will have these points written so you can read them.
Yeah.
So has this video changed the way you look at your work in progress? Let us know in the comments.
If you liked this video, please hit subscribe. We post
every 3 weeks
videos.
Nobody watches the ending anyway.
If you like,
somebody says,
do you want me to try and do it?
But don't you think it's true? As soon as somebody says, thanks for watching, they turn off the video.
Yeah.
Which is why we don't have great endings.
All right, that'll do.